What's up, everybody? What's up, MGTOW? So this is going to be another one of those not fun Square.Peg videos where I talk about political and social stuff. So in this video, as you probably see by the title, I like to discuss the topic of ethnoseparatism. Now, this is a pretty controversial topic, and also I'd have to add the caveat that I think that it's probably not going to happen ever based on the actions and past actions of the government, at least in the United States, and just the feasibility of actually creating separate states with different ethnicities in them. Because one of the main, I guess, things that you would need to have a successful nation or small nation, kind of like separate nation, would be access to ports or port cities. And I really doubt that the government is going to give up access to any of those on the coasts, like say Atlanta or Portland or maybe Port Newark or Port Elizabeth, something like that. I just don't see the government ever ceding that land over to any ethnicity, regardless of what happened to them in the past or might happen to them in the future. But saying that, I'd still like to give my personal thoughts on ethnoseparatism and also some of the, I guess, rationale and logic behind why I think it probably would be the best solution as far as moving forward and problems with races or ethnicities within the United States. So, one of the main reasons why I probably don't even talk about ethnoseparatism very much is because, personally, it wouldn't be beneficial to me at all. I mean, if I am honest and imagine back all the way to my childhood and all the way through my adulthood, I would say that the vast majority of interactions that I've had with black people, African American people, people of African descent, or the descendants of African slaves in the United States, whatever you want to call us, black people, colored people, Negroes, yeah. So, yeah, most of my interactions have been solidly negative. Either people outright insult how I talk, how I look, how I dress, with no reprieve. I mean, I'm all for hazing and stuff. You just meet somebody, you don't know who they are, you make fun of them a little bit, ha ha ha, you talk a little funny, but after you've known me for a year, I've worked with you for a year, 2 years, 3 years, gone to school with you your whole entire life, you'd think you might let up on that a little bit, just a little bit. You know, maybe every time I see you, you don't have to say, man, you sound white, you sound white, you sound white. I mean, I don't even understand how someone can sound a race. I personally think that I sound like myself, but you know how people are. They like to put people into boxes. And so, I mean, I can't even take it as an insult. You're saying I speak well and I sound literate. I sound like I pronounce my words sometimes correctly, sometimes not. You know, I don't know. I think everybody does that. But take it as it is. I sound white. That usually leads into physical altercations, especially when I was younger. A lot of robberies, a lot of threats of violence, just a lot. I'm not even going to go through it all, but just in general, my overall interactions with the vast majority of black people in the United States has been negative. I mean, even within MGTOW circles, or I guess the Black Manosphere circles, very negative interactions with other content creators that I try to go on live streams with. Same things that I'm describing here. Same thing happened with them. Same thing that's been happening my whole life. So again, for me personally, living in a black ethno state is probably one of the last things that I want to do. But at the same time, I do think that having a black ethno state and a white ethno state, I mean, I'm sorry, Mexicans, but you guys can walk to an ethno-state, so I don't see why you should get an ethno-state. Maybe a Japanese and Chinese ethno-state. But then again, these ethno-states, I mean, kind of part of the reason for having a black ethno-state, and similarly with Native American treaties, is obviously historical factors, which I'm not going to get into right now. So, I mean, having a Chinese or Japanese ethno-state for people that came here in the later part of the 20th century or early part of the 20th century is slightly a different topic than talking about Native Americans and African Americans. Because I'm sure that, if Africans could have walked back to Africa as soon as the Civil War was over, I'm sure most of us would have packed our bags and just kind of walked back to Africa, and we wouldn't even be having this discussion right now. So, saying that, I do think that there are some kind of logical principles, biological, legal principles behind there being a benefit to certain ethnicities or groups separating from each other in a certain way. Now, first of all, just looking at it biologically and the legal and social ramifications of having or trying to have a unified legal system for separate ethnicities should be obvious. I mean, obviously, the Chinese have a different governmental system than the United States because biologically, Chinese people are slightly different than white people. And Africa has different political systems than the United States or Europe because black people are biologically different than Europeans. And so on and so forth. There's different systems work for different people. So if we go back to the sports analogy, we can see that, for instance, somebody who's a world-class deadlifter is not also going to become a world-class 500-meter dash runner. It's just not, it's not the same thing. You might be able to deadlift 1,000 pounds, but you're not going to be winning very many track and field meets, and vice versa. Just different system. Nobody's saying that one system is better than the other. And since we're all moral relativists now because nobody can prove that God or truth actually exist, and fists in the face and bullets in the head definitely work a lot better than trying to convince people that, you should be a good person just because, nobody asked to be alive, and kind of sucks getting shot in the face just because somebody decided to have sex 18 years before you got shot in the face, and now here you are getting shot in the face. Yeah, I mean, that's just my personal opinion on it, though. I'm sure other people have different ones. So, with that kind of informing my libertarian ethic on this situation, and the fact that their basically integration is going against freedom of association, which is one of the basic libertarian principles that this country was founded on. And the fact of the matter is that, going back to the sports analogy again, that black people, for instance, could be said to be playing a game on an away court, somebody else's game. So if you look at it like that, it's like black people were playing white people's game by white people's rules on white people's court, and they have twice as many players on the field as we do. I mean, it doesn't seem feasible that we can win. It doesn't seem like a team with half the amount of players and the other team's been playing the game for thousands and thousands of years, and you just started playing the game 5 minutes ago. I don't see you becoming league champions anytime soon. It's just not going to happen. And to imagine that that's going to happen is it's crazy, because just looking at sports, I mean, imagine you're playing a game and one team's been playing and practicing and playing the game. It's their game. They made up the game. It's their rules. It's their home field advantage. They have twice as many players on the field as you do. I mean, what are the chances of you winning? Would you bet on that team that has half as many players? I mean, in any other situation? So to say that one team is better than the other team objectively is hard to do because, one team has twice as many players. It's their game. They've been playing it for thousands and thousands of years. So it's only right to let black people go and play their own game on their own field, on their own court, so that they have a chance to be champions of their own league. And also, on the other hand, it would also open the opportunity for those whites who want to live in a more ethno-segregated area where they don't have to interact with other ethnicities. Because, why would you want to keep them? Why would you want to force them to be integrated into a society that they don't want to be forced into? It's kind of like Gab, where, before everybody was saying stuff and negative things about black people on YouTube, and now they're on Gab. So unless you actually go to Gab, you don't have to see that stuff. And it would be the same thing. You wouldn't have to worry if there was a undercover quote unquote racist. That's not a very good term, but I'm just using that term in the midst of, at your job or something like that, because you would know that all the people that don't like black people are over here. You know exactly where they are. They're over here and they're not bothering you. They built a wall around their place and they don't want to bother you. As long as they don't want to bother anybody, I think that is completely fine. And the same thing with black people, Native Americans, as long as they don't want to bother anybody else, why can't they have a little section that's cut off? Because if we go back to this biological argument and how biology affects culture, and then the fact that for most people that value and everything is subjective and, laws and rules and stuff are just made up by man for the convenience of man. If we're going to use that logic, which I don't 100% agree with, but if we are going to use that logic, which seems to be the prevailing logic of the times, then we can't say that white culture is objectively better than black culture. Black culture is different than white culture. And to expect black people to conform to the same cultural milieu, the same laws as white people is in effect a flawed proposition, because biologically white people and black people are different, so therefore they need different systems. Like I said before, China is different than Europe and Africa is different than the United States, and there probably are some biological reasons for that. It's not just how people think, it's also how people act and also the type of society that it's going to create. Because, for example, most people will point to technology as being quote unquote objectively better. But at the same time, technology makes you dependent on technology. Because, for example, Africans kill each other at a higher rate, but Africans also have much stronger genetics that can survive on the planet without high technology. So using IQ tests and all this other stuff, all IQ tests shows that you can make computers. Great, you can build computers and your houses are more square and made out of harder bricks. But at the same time, your society is dying due to hyper-gynocentrism, which is, for the most part, created through the use of highly advanced technology. Because if we were still all living in mud huts, there wouldn't be any gynocentrism. So again, to say that white culture is quote unquote objectively better than black culture is a misnomer, because it depends what you want. Do you want to have strong genetics and strong people that can survive outside, basically on the surface of the planet? Or do you want to have a high technology society where you all have to live indoors and you're losing your hair and losing your fur and your eyes are getting square and eventually you'll be sucked inside the computer? And that will be the way that white culture goes. That's the way this technology stuff is going to go. Eventually you just download your brain into the computer and it won't matter what race you are, ethnicity anyway. Meanwhile, black people will still be in Africa grinding against the actual environment that was non-man-made. I don't want to say natural, but it was non-man-made environment, and dealing with that and the actual genetic code of Africans is becoming stronger and stronger and stronger, instead of the technology is becoming stronger and stronger and stronger, and the people that use the technology are becoming weaker and weaker and weaker. So again, to say that one is quote unquote objectively better than the other is a misnomer. Because we can ask some hypothetical questions about the situation and about laws specifically. For example, one of the biggest ones is murder. Well, perhaps black people are supposed to kill each other at a higher rate. And that's what fuels our form of evolution, is that we're constantly at war. Because it's funny that a lot of people, moral relativists and relativists in general, will quote Darwin and say, you know, we should get rid of all the poor and the weak, and using war is a great way to do that. But then when you see Africans or black people at war, then you criticize that and say that that's a negative, and that's a, you know, but at the same time, you'll tout that the United States military is the most powerful military in the world and that they can kill the most amount of people. But then when Africans or black people are killing each other, then all of a sudden it's a negative aspect of being a black person. And I mean, personally, I don't want to be killed, but I mean, obviously a lot of black people engage in that type of activity. And the fact that white people's society developed differently, white people didn't want to live in that way. And also because they developed guns, they evolved with guns and evolved a culture around guns that's definitely different than the culture that black people in America have evolved around guns. It's just different. But black people have been warring with each other before guns, and white people were as well. I'm not trying to say that anybody's past was not bloody or more bloody than the other one. It's just time and difference in environments caused the differences in the races. And so therefore, maybe, just maybe hypothetically, you know, maybe black people need to have a more authoritarian government. Maybe. I'm not sure. I mean, I haven't done enough research, but when you see certain African countries, they are more authoritarian than libertarian, like it is in Europe and in the United States. And so maybe the set of laws that black people are living under is incompatible. I mean, it's almost the same thing as globalism. You know, it's like America wouldn't do well under globalism because there'd be this universal set of laws for every country in the world. And Americans are against that because they don't want to be under the same laws as China and under the same laws as Africa and the same laws as India, because we have a different set of laws which are more libertarian and more individualistic and more capitalistic than a lot of other countries in the world. So perhaps, you know, Africans or black people can create their ethnostate and have a different approach to how they punish murderers, or even approach to competition and violence in the first place, and set up a different set of laws, maybe set up more competitive systems and things of that nature where people do get taken out of the game, quote unquote, in a way that's more, I don't want to say humane, but in a way that's more direct, where it's like, you know, you're joining this and you're going to fight, and if you die, it's because, and it's for eugenics and all this other stuff, in a more informed, voluntary way than, you know, being born in the ghetto and then you have to join a gang and sell crack and then you get shot because, you know, you're selling crack and all that stuff. So you can kind of see what I'm saying. Like, there's differences in, you know, behavior patterns, and the laws are set up for white people to prosper. It's just how it is. And black people are different, so they're not going to prosper in the same way. Not all black people, but on the whole, we can see through statistics that murder and rape and other violent crimes and things like that are higher amongst black people, and there possibly may be some genetic factors that go into that. And I know everybody's saying, oh, you're a white supremacist now, but come on. You guys know I'm not. I mean, I don't think that there's a supremacy. There's differences, like I've just gone over previously in this video. But so hypothetically, we can see that possibly allowing for these different groups to set up their own systems of law. In a sense, I mean, obviously there would still have to be some intervention from the federal government, even though I hate the federal government. But I mean, as if we're within the lands of the United States in some aspect, then yeah, there's probably going to have to be some federal government intervention. Now, again, why I think that this won't work, one of the main reasons was because I was looking into some of the treaties that the United States government signed with the Native American tribes early on before the Civil War, basically post-Revolutionary War, in between then and the Civil War. And basically the government reneged on most of the contracts because the land was too valuable, especially on the East Coast. I know for a fact that, the town that I lived in, the Lenape Indians used to live there, and they had a Native American reservation, but they actually kicked all the Native Americans out because, they had like 500 acres of land less than 20 miles away from New York City. They weren't going to let them just stay there. They kicked them out and they moved them out west somewhere. And so we can see that the treaty itself would probably be reneged on, even if the government did sign a treaty and say, oh, well, black people can move to Atlanta and all white people have to move out of Atlanta, and then white people can move to Portland, Oregon, and all the black people have to move out of Portland, Oregon, if there is any black people in Portland, Oregon. Anyway, I don't know. But you see where I'm going with this, is that these treaties were supposed to guarantee sovereignty to the Native Americans, and there were some caveats, basically that the military was able to pass through the lands in order to do attacks on the British at the time, and also that a certain percentage of Native Americans would have to enlist in the army to help them fight against the British, which does seem fair. I mean, to have basically sovereignty in exchange for, some military service and possibly maybe some small tax exchanges and still having some form of free trade in between the different states or whatever you want to call it would seem feasible. And of course, the government's not going to allow this because from my research into, European culture and specifically British culture, which British culture has a huge influence on United States culture, one can see that British culture is highly stratified. There's regional dialects, and there's also social status dialects. Like, for instance, you have Cockney, which would be considered a low-class dialect, and then you have, like, your received pronunciation, which is commonly known as the Queen's English, and those would be high-class people. And from my experiences in England, people, not all, but some people do judge other people based on their dialect, similar to in the United States, where if you have a Cockney accent, some people will look at you and think that you're poor and they don't want to associate with you. And if you have a received pronunciation accent, some, Cockney people might think that you're kind of stuck up and, they won't want to associate with you. But one of the main problems with the social stratification, and specifically between the British and the Irish, is that the Irish look British. I mean, from my estimation, and again, this is just hypothetical or conjecture, but from my estimation, they specifically brought black people here to be a permanent underclass on purpose, because when they tried to implement socialism in England, and socialism, you need a large kind of underclass of people that are always starving and hungry and have no place to live, so you can force them to work for the money that you print. Because if everybody's doing good, then they no longer need to, borrow money from the government or ask the government for money, and they can work independently. So in order to force people to work, you need a large underclass of poor people that you can force to work and keep them strung along through inflation and all this stuff, and they can never keep up, but they can't quit because they don't have enough to survive. So basically, one of the problems with that, if you, in a homogenous country or semi-homogenous country like what you would have between the British and the Irish, you're going to elicit more sympathy for the lower class. Because, for instance, if the poor guy, homeless guy on the street looks like your mom or your uncle or your dad, or you see some homeless single mom and she looks like your aunt, you're going to feel more sympathy than if you see somebody and then you see them as a killer, or they're more prone to violence and this and that, which may or may not be true. And in some instances it is true, but that's besides the point. The point is that it's not going to elicit the same amount of sympathy so it's going to be harder to keep that social stratification in place when it's more homogenous. And you can see that with the Polish solidarity movement, because in Poland, after World War II, they were really working the workers a lot and hard. And because the country was so homogenous and so united with their history and their story and their genealogy, they were actually able to pull off a nationwide strike and demand better treatment by the government, which that will never happen in America because everybody's a scab for everybody else. So if, white people went on strike, black people and Mexican people would try to take their spots, and, all the different groups have competing interests. So if anybody tries to stop and go on strike or do something different, another group can just pop into their place and they'll just lose their spot. It won't be like a solidarity movement like they had in Poland. And the second problem is crime. Because, for instance, in the Troubles during that time in Ireland and also in Britain, where there was a lot of pub bombings during that time, it's not hard to see. Somebody with, say, for instance, the voice acting skills of Computing Forever, Dave Cullen, he could easily pull off a Cockney British accent, walk into a bar on a Friday, a pub on a Friday with a briefcase, slide it under one of the booths, walk out, say cheers to everybody, and then bang, and blow up the whole pub. A black person can't do it. A black person can't walk into an all-white venue with a bomb in his briefcase. People are going to be suspicious. They're going to be instantly suspicious. It's the same thing with the Muslims. People are suspicious of Muslims, so it's much harder for Muslims to commit crimes because everybody's already suspicious of them. But when you have a group of people that looks the same as you and they're the criminals, it's harder to filter them out because they can get away with more. And like I said, an Irish guy could put on a British accent, and even not for crime, even just for social climbing. A Cockney guy can learn received pronunciation and then walk into a posh restaurant and hit on women and stuff and maybe get into the circle, get into the club, because there's no way to tell. It's like, who knows what neighborhood this guy grew up in? He sounds like he knows how to speak received pronunciation to me, So it's harder to keep that social stratification going when you have a homogenous nation. And it's just my theory, but that's why they did it on purpose. They did it on purpose. And so what I, at least in my personal opinion, more than money or time or anything, what was lost for Africans and the African descendants of slaves, whatever, it was their sovereignty and self-determination. That's what was lost, not money, not time. It was the right to develop your own society to fit your biology and your structure and your system, instead of trying to play their game, their rules, their court on a game that they've been playing for thousands of years that you just started playing 5 minutes ago. So, like I'm saying, it's a very difficult topic, and like I said, it's probably something that will never happen, but to me it seems like a better alternative than demanding $80,000 from every white person in the United States in the form of a check, because it's just very hard. And in that way, once the government or whatever is established in the ethno-state, you can let anyone in that you want. If black people from Canada want to come into the black ethno-state in the United States, then they can come, because it would be your government and you'd be deciding who's allowed to come into the state and not. If people from the Caribbean want to come, If you would decide that you want to let them in, then let them in. If you don't, then don't. You know? And it would work better that way than trying to figure out exactly who was a slave and where they were and what they were doing and how much they worked and how much they were whipped and all this other stuff, than to just have a homeland for anybody that's part of the black diaspora. And then also at the same time, it would help the white people too. It would help the alt-right. I mean, I have nothing against them. If they want to live in a place where it's just white people and it's cold all the time and stuff like that, or I don't know if that's exactly what they want, but, you know, something like that, that would be better for black people also, because then you would know that all the people that hate you, that want to kill you and all this other stuff that you think, they're over there. And now they're happy because they don't have to look at you and they don't have to have your pictures in the TV and magazines, and they don't have to listen to rap music. I think that would resolve a lot of the problems, you know? But I mean, that's just the way I look at it. And like I said, I'll post some links to those peace treaties so you can look at them yourself. But basically, it looks like the only problem with the peace treaties was that the government reneged on them. And they just said, you know what, we're actually not going to take this land back now. You know, prime real estate on the East Coast, and, you know. But that's just how it is. So, yeah, I've gone on for quite some time now, so I'm going to get out of here with this. And have a good day, and go MGTOW.